Have you ever been somewhere for the first time, but it was so familiar that you felt like you'd been there before? Somewhere new, but also a place that you'd known forever. Somewhere foreign, yet recognizable. Almost like stepping into a memory from a past life, or a dream that you still remember. Monroeville, often referred to as the crossroads of western Pennsylvania, or the better-suited eastern gateway to Pittsburgh depending on which way you're traveling from, sits about 30 minutes east of Pittsburgh. Mostly farmland until the 1950s, Monroeville is now a suburban, commercial, and economic hub with many businesses and neighborhoods that contribute to the community. Hotels, trade and convention centers, restaurants, large retailers and small businesses alike all line the main artery of Route 22 like a commercial constellation stretched along the asphalt. The image could be copied and pasted in any metro suburban city in the United States. But just inside the city limits sits a monolith of commercial and cultural significance, a place that simultaneously represents capitalist consumerism, but also celebrates the importance of community, friendship, and connection: the Monroeville Mall. To some people, that description could probably apply to any mall between the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. Generation X and most millennials practically grew up inside of one on weekends and after school. Water fountains, escalators, skylights, background music, and the distant hum and echo of other humans inhabiting the same space. Living, shopping, eating, and existing together. Now, mostly memories forever cemented in time by the ever-constant and inevitable push of cultural progress and urban redevelopment. On the outside, the Monroeville Mall may appear no different from any of the others that have come and gone over the last half-century. But what is it that separates this one from the others? What is it that makes this one so important that people from all over the world travel thousands of miles to see it? People like me who pack up their family, their dogs, and belongings and drive for days across the United States year after year. To quote author and poet D.H. Lawrence, different places on the face of the earth have different vital effluence, different vibration, different chemical exhalation, different polarity with different stars. Call it what you like, but the spirit of a place is a great reality. The first time that I heard about the Monroeville Mall was when I was 12, and like most people that aren't natives of the Pittsburgh area, I discovered it through George Romero's seminal classic, Dawn of the Dead, but not right away. It was at this age that I started exploring horror films as escapism. There's always this feeling of exhilaration, this rush that would come when you were seeing something you probably shouldn't be seeing, especially at such a young age. Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers all became buddies of mine, and we'd hang out often. I would basically barricade myself in my room and devour anything that I could get my hands on from the mom-and-pop video store down the street from where I lived. The owner was a teacher's assistant from my kindergarten year of elementary school, and she would pretty much let me rent anything that I wanted, no questions asked. At the same time, I'd been communicating with a pen pal through the mail. And yes, before Facebook and social media, people actually wrote to each other through the mail. My pen pal had written to me that her main interest was horror films, and that her favorite was Night of the Living Dead. Not having been familiar with George Romero at this point, the first thing that I did was ride my bike to the mom-and-pop video store to try to rent it, which shouldn't have been a difficult task at the time due to the infamous copyright fiasco and the hundreds of different copies that were available at the time. But I could not find it on the shelf. What I did find on the shelf was a similar title, Day of the Dead. These titles had to be connected, right? They both have of the dead in the name. There must be some sort of connection. I remember taking the tape home, putting it in the player, and having my fucking mind blown for the next 100 minutes. Now, there are two things that can happen to a kid when they witness that level of cinematic violence for the first time. They can turn their nose up at it and run away, or they can lean into it with a morbid curiosity. I was the latter. But the violence isn't what pulled me in. There was something else going on that I couldn't yet articulate at such a young age, but was still emotionally mature enough to understand even if I couldn't describe it. Atmosphere. Thick, dark, and heavy. Humans hidden below the earth in a subterranean mine, away from the living dead above, but trapped together amidst clashing principles, deteriorating communication, and hopeless desperation in a hostile environment below. What I was seeing on screen reflected everything that I was feeling at that time. Isolation, detachment, fear, anger, conflict. The tension on screen was palpable and mirrored what I was experiencing at home. What I later discovered is that Romero was immensely talented at articulating this on paper and on film. He was a master painter who used his brush to express and interpret his own feelings and experiences onto canvas. A true artist in every sense of the word. Day of the Dead was more than just a zombie horror film. It was a study of human dissension that, even in exposing our fractures, ultimately highlighted the depth, resilience, and shared spirit of our own humanity. Despite its bleak and claustrophobic perspective, one emotion elevated above all the others: hope. For the first time in my life, I'd found something that I could relate to on a deeply and profoundly personal level. So, the next logical step was to find anything and everything that Romero had touched in an attempt to chase that feeling. As soon as I returned Day of the Dead to the video rental store, the first thing that I did was scour the shelves for anything that I could find with Romero's names in the credits. And there, in all of its glory, was the yellow Republic Pictures VHS copy of Dawn of the Dead, with the name George Romero above the lime green title. I rented it, I took it home as quickly as I could, and had my life changed for the second time. I have a very clear memory of sitting on my bed in my room, staring at this homemade poster on the wall that I'd made from an internet image printout of the protagonist from Dawn. It's a staged production photo with all of the characters armed to the teeth, side by side, weapons pointed in every direction. A symbolic portrait of unity and strength with an edge of danger. Behind them, the familiar imagery of a shopping mall. A staircase leading up and out of frame to a second floor, foliage lining the concourse, and a storefront to the group's side. It's a defiant image and a powerful representation of the heart of the film itself. Armed figures protecting a temple of glass and marble, a cathedral of commerce. A sanctuary, yet also a prison. This image always struck an emotional chord with me. It's effective in describing the film's narrative. It's a bold statement about material possession and the empty pursuit to guard and defend it. Weapons aimed at both the living and the dead. A warning to all. This is ours, and you can't have it. But behind the warning, behind the band of survivors desperate to defend their figurative materialism, lies the literal and physical embodiment, and the most important character in the entire film: the mall itself. The film immediately introduces us to our main four protagonists, collectively banding together to escape the chaos that's quickly enveloping the world. Fran and Steven, both employees of WGON-TV, decide to flee from a chaotic newsroom, while Roger and Peter, both SWAT officers, abscond from a housing project under siege, both from the living and the dead. The message that Romero always expressed so smartly and so subtly. A nod and a handshake with his audience that he was so well known for. Who are the real bad guys here? And who's really in control? Steven, appropriately nicknamed Flyboy by Peter, shuttles the group out of the main city in his WGON helicopter. From above, they witness the madness below. The living dead scatter the earth, farmland, and side roads, while bands of the military and renegade militia patrol the landscape in an attempt to control the problem. A pit stop to refuel the bird nearly ends in disaster as the group is attacked by zombies. A reminder that in this new world, safety is not a luxury that is ever within reach. It's apparent at this moment that there is also a friction that has developed between Stephen and Peter. Stephen, inexperienced and clumsy, clashes with Peter's stern demeanor and militaristic rigidity. The two are aligned only by their shared desire to escape. This sets up an arc for both characters that would progressively flesh itself out as Stephen and Peter begin to collectively bond together and collaborate through the film's storyline, eventually learning to set aside differences to work and live together peacefully. Trauma bonding at its finest. This is yet another example of Romero's brilliant writing. George had his finger on the pulse of humanity and truly knew how to articulate emotions between characters. He was an observant auteur with a delicate and distinct eye for the inner workings of relationships. He knew how to build them up, and he also knew how to destroy them. Romero understood human beings in a way that very few people could. Their strengths and weaknesses, their empathy and cruelty alike. The group resumes their aimless endeavor for safety, flying through the night and into the morning towards whatever salvation they may find. And then, there it was, emblazoned on film, forever etched into the annals of cinematic history. At this moment, Romero not only introduced the world to the most important character in his film, but he also opened a doorway. He unknowingly created an idea and a feeling that would resonate with so many people for decades to come. Like many others, I immediately attached myself to the idea and concept of fortifying a mall and creating a living space inside of it, safe from the outside world while simultaneously being surrounded by anything and everything that could fulfill my own materialistic desires. It was something that, while intangible at the time to most, allowed for an imaginative escape for those that couldn't see it in person. It became a figurative playground for people. They could watch their heroes play cowboys and Indians on the screen and then picture themselves doing it in their own minds. Here our group finds the shelter that they were searching for, albeit temporary. They work together to clear the mall of the undead, blocking the entrances and barricading themselves inside along with their own false sense of security. But their victory does not go unscathed. Roger, whose slow descent into madness has been building since his introduction during the SWAT raid near the beginning of the film, becomes a victim of his own recklessness. He's bitten, an unspoken death sentence that ultimately leads to his demise and eventual reanimation. Romero again shows his eye for humanity here. He's highlighted the fragility of the human mind, easily broken when faced with insurmountable stress, anxiety, and trauma. He shows us that even our own ideas and representations of strength are not safe from consequence. We're all capable of collapse. We are forced to endure Roger's death twice, the first from his infection and the second at the hands of Peter, who mercifully relieves his friend of an undead existence. It's here where we see more layers begin to peel. Peter's stoic rigidity that's been present since the beginning gives way to one of the most basic and relatable human emotions: grief. George was painfully aware of the human condition. He understood it fully and deeply. And he used it against his audience not to manipulate them, but as a tool to enlighten them. Beneath his pessimistic view of society, there was, in my opinion, a true belief in the good of mankind. He handled it gently at times and viciously at others, but used it all to speak truth to power through his medium. The rest of the film sees the remaining characters experience the boredom of existence inside of their new fortress, empty and meaningless as the days pass by, surrounded by useless material possessions. All the money, clothes, jewelry, and toys at their disposal inside, none of which can change what's happening on the outside. Yet another smart nod by Romero. Just as our group decides that they've had enough of it and form a plan to leave, the mall is attacked by road-hardened raiders. Stephen is wounded in the process, and eventually falls prey to the undead who have re-entered the mall due to the delinquency of the invaders that have broken down the barriers and allowed chaos back inside. Like Roger, Stephen is a victim of his own carelessness, blinded by his own greed and selfishness and becoming the very thing that he fought so hard against and despised. Peter and Fran escape the mall in Stephen's helicopter, leaving it behind how it was when they found it, wild and untamed. Romero's allegory showcasing the pitfalls of a consumerist society complete. Dawn of the Dead is almost a completely different beast than Day, save for the common theme of humans surviving against the living dead. The most notable difference is the contrast in tone. Whereas Day is tense, bleak, and claustrophobic, Dawn is adventurous and stylized, visceral yet upbeat, like a comic book come to life. There's an energy and a lightness about Dawn that separates it from the dourness and gloom of its successor. Like Day of the Dead, the violence was still evident and plays throughout the entirety of the film in various scenes of carnage, from head explosions to undead decapitations, to zombies disemboweling humans and devouring their flesh. Gunshots spouting Technicolor red. The marble floors of the mall smeared and painted with blood. Shocking displays of cinematic brutality that momentarily flirts with exploitation and teeters right on the edge of extreme. Despite its deeper meaning, Dawn is also a savage display of violence and viscera. But again, like Day, it wasn't the violence that attracted me. It was the message and its delivery. It was the not-so-hidden subtext of the dead representing our consumerist society. Their need to devour human flesh mirroring our own compulsion to consume. The horror is systemic before it's supernatural. Another example of Romero toying with the idea that we are our own worst enemies, seeking refuge in and imprisoning ourselves amongst our own selfish desires, something that would ultimately lead to disaster by the end of the film. Victims of our own hubris. Romero was proficient at pulling back the curtain and revealing our own shameful and hideous truths. He was unapologetically anti-establishment, a champion of counterculture that was never afraid to hold up the mirror. It's a common motif and through line for the majority of his work. The same was true behind the scenes as well. Romero would always stick to his guns, never willing to jeopardize his own artistic integrity to cave to the whims of mainstream studio involvement. He was fiercely independent and embodied the true spirit of rebellious artistry. He never wavered, something that was and still is somewhat of a rarity. He'd use and reuse the same players over and over again on many productions, manifesting a familial atmosphere that was undeniably present on screen. It was seared into the negatives and ingrained into the DNA. George created a traveling Arthurian troupe of loyal friends and family that believed in his vision, something similar to his story of Knight Riders. It was art imitating life, and there's something undeniably endearing about that. All of this was true on the set of Dawn of the Dead. If you ask any cast or any crew member or anyone within the same hemisphere of the film's production, they'd all tell you the same thing. It was an exciting, collaborative, life-changing experience. According to Romero himself, the production felt like real guerrilla filmmaking. Everyone was involved, everyone cared, and so everyone had fun. Cast members forged lifelong friendships. Crew members were allowed the space to experiment. Savini was able to hone in on his craft, cutting his teeth on new and inventive special effects that would eventually open doors to a successful career. Extras piled into the photo booth, taking pictures of themselves in zombie makeup as keepsakes, saving some and using others to replace the stock photos on the outside of the kiosk to scare mall shoppers as a prank. Joyrides on golf carts, laughter down empty hallways, 3 a.m. coffee break confessionals, bonding through collaboration. Artists discovered themselves, and there was a freedom to create. Everyone pitched in, everyone contributed. They own the world. It's impossible to believe that this energy isn't still present when you walk into the Monroeville Mall. It's echoed across the marble flooring and the pillars that line the thoroughfare. It's in the smell that hits your nose as soon as you cross the threshold of the southeastern entrance. It's reflected in the squared, mid-century modern skylights that freckle the ceiling above. It sings within the humming of the control room machinery, faint from a distance but roaring the closer you get to it through the back halls. Every inch of the mall holds history, a spirit. The idea to use the mall as a location for Dawn of the Dead came to fruition around 1974 or 1975. George had been in contact with Mark Mason, one of the owners of Oxford Development Company, that he'd met years earlier at a party honoring George's film Jack's Wife. George had been pitching Mason ideas, and the two had become friends. To quote Romero from The Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh, "He gave me a lot of good advice. His offices were at the mall, and one of the times that I was out there, he gave me a tour. He showed me these crawl spaces up above and told me that people could probably survive up there, and I thought, here it is." But just a decade or so earlier, the site where the Monroeville Mall now sits was a parcel of land called Harper's Mine. According to which local you ask, the area used to be a garbage dump, or a large hill, woods with a waterfall, or even a junkyard. Author Zandy Dudiak noted in her book, Remembering Monroeville, that there was at one time a coal mine on the property, along with 3 large hills and ravine, with some of the land around it rising to 1,200 feet, which developers had to fill with dirt to create a flat enough surface to build. Up to this point, outdoor shopping centers like Miracle Mile, located about a mile and a half down Route 22, were where a majority of people did most of their shopping. Into the 60s, these types of centers with chain retailers were already starting to attract customers away from mom-and-pop stores in nearby boroughs like Braddock and Pitcairn. But as the times tend to change, so do the trends. By the latter part of the decade, indoor shopping malls had become the new fad. Grading work would commence in 1966, with construction beginning in 1967, after the property was acquired by Pittsburgh-based Donmark Realty. It would take 2 years to build the 1.3 million square foot mall that inhabited 110 acres of the 280-acre plot, and would cost roughly $30 million to complete. Excavation costs alone totaled roughly $2.5 million. The Monroeville Mall was designed to be 20% larger than Pittsburgh's South Hills Village Mall, which at the time was the largest indoor shopping mall between New York and Chicago. Allegheny County planned a $1.5 million road improvement project to widen a 2.5-mile stretch along Monroeville Road and Northern Pike into 4 lanes to handle the expected traffic increase that the mall would bring to Monroeville. It was estimated that the complex would bring up to roughly 70,000 cars a day. The mall was dedicated on Tuesday, May 13, 1969. When it opened to the public, it held 125 storefronts within its 2 levels. Big-name retailers at the time like Gimbels and Horns anchored either end of the complex, each inhabiting roughly 190,000 square feet of space to themselves. Penny's would relocate from the Miracle Mile Shopping Center to become the mall's center anchor. Tenants like Reisenstein sold china and glassware. Spaces ranged from barbershops and fabric stores to record stores, travel agencies, and home goods retailers. Docker Pet Center, House of Nine, Singer Sewing, National Record Mart, Hughes and Hatcher, and G.C. Murphy 5 and 10 were a few of the many storefronts that ran the length of the mall. Biggs sold hardware and housewares. A shop called East sold incense and curiosities from the Far East. There was something for everyone. Centered in the Joseph Horn courtyard sat a large circular fountain that provided a moment of calm for mall patrons and a wishing well for collecting loose change. At one time a prominent feature, it's now something that's absent from almost any mall that still stands across the United States today, save for maybe a few. On the opposite end in the Gimbels Court sat the famous 32-foot-tall clock tower. It stretched from the first floor all the way through to the second, reaching towards the skylights above. Each side featured 3 puppets for a total of 12, all representing an ethnic group of Pittsburgh. Every hour on the hour, a small door would open, and one of the 12 puppets would perform. All 12 would perform together at both 1 and 6 p.m. Atop the golden, pyramid-shaped point of the tower perched a decorative bird. A small, delicate touch that added an extra bit of tranquility and softness to the beautiful display. The space in between both courtyards was spattered with various footbridges, ponds, tropical plants, trees, and foliage. More early-era relics of the past, and another aesthetic devoid from most modern malls today. But the centerpiece of the mall was a full-sized ice arena, the first to exist inside of an East Coast shopping center. The Ice Palace. Gun to my head, If there was one thing that I could go back in time to see, it would be the Ice Palace, with the clock tower being a close second. If you were to visit the mall today, you could actually sit and enjoy a meal where it once stood. Now, where skates once sliced against the ice, sits the food court, installed after the rink was removed in 1984. But at one time, there was a 15,000 square foot arena that eclipsed the Rockefeller Plaza ice rink in New York City. Architects consulted professional skater George Lipchek during the rink's construction to compare pros and cons from similar rinks around the country in order to develop the best arena possible. Initially, only public and figure skating was permitted on the rink. There was even an Ice Palace figure skating school that offered classes for people that wanted to hone their skills and learn the sport. Eventually, nearby Gateway High School was allowed to use the rink for competitions along with other neighboring schools. Similar to its name, the image of the rink was taken literally. It looked like a palace. Everything from the Italian marble pillars to the glass enclosure. The ice was so pristine that people would kneel down and touch it to see if it was real. Every year around Christmas, Santa would visit the rink, and athletes would visit the rink too. Everyone from Pirates Hall of Famer Willie Stargell to Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw, who stopped by after a Super Bowl win to sign autographs. The crowd was so large that he had to be snuck in and out of a fire exit. The arena became the center of so many different life events, much like the mall itself. Countless days of conversations and laughter, joy and sadness alike. The ice may be gone, but the marble pillars still echo their memories. To quote author Zandy Dudiak, moms and kids showed up, and dads too. Teenagers found it, as did senior citizens. Couples fell in love there. Skating clubs met there, and hockey teams won and lost there. Despite its cold temperature, the Ice Palace represented warmth to so many. Now frozen in time, it belongs only to the memories of those who were lucky enough to have touched its surface. The ghost of a bygone era when things were easier, time moved slower, and the cruel hand of inevitable change had not yet interfered. I often wonder how many people stood and stared at the clock tower, watching the puppets dance and perform every hour. How many children were struck and mesmerized by its size and beauty? Or how many people down on their luck tossed a penny or a nickel into the fountain, hopeful for some sort of divine intervention or change in their lives? Or how many people spent hours, days, weeks, or even years skating at the Ice Palace, meeting new friends, future lovers, and spouses? This was an important place in their lives. To this day, I sometimes look back to that memory of being a kid and seeing that image on the wall of the heroes from Dawn of the Dead with their weapons aimed, defending their sanctuary against anything and everything that might threaten it. And to this day, it's still one of my favorite images from any film, ever. I would dream about one day traveling across the country to see them all and stand where my heroes once stood. At the time, it seemed so impossible, something so far out of reach that I resigned the idea to just a wish, something that more than likely would never come to be. Instead, I would retreat to the mall in my mind, a self-created refuge that I could go to whenever I wanted. I would watch the film on repeat, study every room, every hallway, every inch of space that was visible on the screen to build it. I could be the hero, barricaded inside of a space where I would be shielded from all of the troubles on the outside. It was a way to escape, and a place that I could hide. Similarly, I would spend a lot of time online doing the same thing. I'd visit websites like The Zombie Farm and study every word and every photo that Norman England posted. Norman, who had already visited the mall several times in person, had very detailed descriptions and photos of it on his site. There was even a virtual mall to better help visualize the layout. Norman had the foresight to know that there would be people like him who would want to see the mall but couldn't, and was understanding enough to realize how important it was to preserve and share as much of that information as possible for others. He provided hope for people like me, that maybe one day we could all turn our wish into reality. As it goes, time moves forward. Years go by, and seasons change, literally and figuratively. Suddenly, I found myself in a position where I realized that I had the means necessary to turn a dream into something tangible. The Living Dead Weekend is a Romero-themed convention that's held at the Monroeville Mall every year since its first in 2015. The convention was originally located in Evans City to celebrate Night of the Living Dead and would eventually move to the Monroeville Mall to focus on Dawn. While the event's theme typically rotates between different films each year, the underlying constant is an appreciation for George Romero, his work, and continuing his legacy. Cast and crew members from George's films gather with fans, friends, and family alike to celebrate together. I remember hearing about the event celebrating the 40th anniversary of Dawn in 2018, but traveling from Atlanta to Pittsburgh at that time was something that still seemed unfeasible. 2 years later would be the 35th anniversary of Day of the Dead, and after much discussion and planning with my family, I decided that that would be the year that I would finally pull the trigger and make my trip to Romero Mecca. I bought our tickets to the Living Dead Weekend in January 2020 for the event that was going to be held in June of that year. I was ecstatic. I'd finally be able to visit the place that I've been dreaming about for most of my life. But as luck would have it, fate decided to intervene. 2 months later, in March 2020, the entire world shut down due to COVID. After many months of watching and waiting for news and updates, it was eventually announced that the event would be postponed to July 4th weekend the following year. The time in between would mostly be spent listening to podcast episodes from WGON and forming connections with other Romero fans online. WGON was a Romero-themed podcast helmed by Matt Blasey and Eric Kent, and it contained interviews and thoughtful analysis from cast members and friends alike. Day in and day out, things like this helped to bridge the gap and pass the time until the following year. It also highlighted that there was a vast community of like-minded people who all shared the same sentiments about Romero and his films that I did, and it only amplified my desire to further seek it out. After an entire year of anticipation and waiting had passed, the world began to open, and in July 2021, I packed up my family and together, we made the journey to Monroeville, Pennsylvania. We passed through 5 states and crossed over giant stretches of majestic Appalachian mountains, which, while were amazing, were not nearly as beautiful as the rivers and steel bridges that were revealed to us as we passed through the Fort Pitt Tunnel into Pittsburgh. I-376 to Route 22 into Monroeville felt like an eternity, with miles of congestion clogging our path. Something that after many repeat visits seems to be a constant no matter what time or day it is. Some people might think it's strange or maybe even imagined, but there's something like an internal barometer that signals when you approach the mall. To people like me, it's something that's undoubtedly real. Instinctively, I drove east around the perimeter of the mall, passing by the Macy's side of the building. I knew exactly where I was going without even having to look at a map. I was headed to the southeastern entrance, which is more commonly referred to as the biker entrance, because this is where the motorcycle raiders breach the mall at the climax of the film. Stepping foot inside of the mall for the first time was a surreal experience with a whole gamut of emotions. As we entered, I was immediately struck with a sense of familiarity, like I'd been here before. The mall smelled exactly how I thought it would. It's impossible to describe, but it belongs only there. Everything looked how I thought it would, but it was somehow different at the same time. While there was an overwhelming feeling of elation standing inside of the mall finally, there was also a subtle ache. This place that I'd known for most of my life without ever actually having visited had changed, a victim to the effects of time. Mall culture had transformed significantly over the last 30 years, and the Monroeville Mall was no exception. There were no trees or foliage, no footbridges or ponds. Gone was the beautiful fountain full of lights in the Horns courtyard, its space now inhabited by a children's play area. Horns itself was rebranded as Lazarus in 1994 before being totally replaced by Macy's in the early 2000s. The Ice Palace was long gone. In its place, the food court. Instead of slicing the ice with skates, you could grab a slice of pizza from Sbarro. In the old Gimbel's courtyard where the magnificent clock tower once stood, bringing so much joy to all those whose gaze it stole, now just an empty space. It was here, overlooking from the second-story balcony, that I realized the space wasn't empty at all. It was filled with laughter, camaraderie, and love. Like-minded people all gathered together to fill the void where the tower once stood, in celebration of the life of the man who made it famous to all of us. His sculpture mounted on a nearby marble column, watching over everyone with a smile. The courtyard, once named after the original anchor that it belonged to, now bears his namesake, Romero Court. While some of the surface has changed significantly over the years, it was and still is apparent that the bones of the mall remain. Romero historian, fan, and friend Larry DeVincentz leads groups through back hallways and staircases, sharing his knowledge and experience to illuminate the building's history. A labor of love that offers people the opportunity to see some of the things that once were, but are no more, and also the things that still are. The staircase that led to our hero's hideout still intact. The machinery in the control room still buzzing. The Johnson controls panel, all of its knobs and gauges still spinning. Hallways and corridors once walked by the characters that we'd known for most of our lives on screen, now present beneath our feet. The building breathes with history and memory, and the past lives through us. It was announced in January 2025 that CBL Properties sold the mall for $34 million to an undisclosed buyer. Initially, many people remained cautiously optimistic that the sale might result in something positive. Maybe a new facelift, some sort of revitalization of the property to benefit the mall itself. All of those hopes were dashed when it was announced that the buyer of the property was Walmart, and even more so when it was discovered that there was a grant application through the state to demolish the mall. Leases will not be renewed for tenants beyond 2026. Plans for the site redevelopment are still relatively unknown outside of new retail, restaurant, and entertainment spaces. While what will live on in the site is uncertain, what is known is that one day, in the very near future, the Monroeville Mall will be no more. Raised and redeveloped, another victim to the inevitable grind of the progress machine. How ironic. The image used to represent the horrors of mindless consumerism would itself fall victim to that very thing, devoured by corporate greed, and no different than the living dead that once walked its surface. The first year that my family and I visited the mall, my son and I decided to recreate the scene from Dawn where Roger and Peter sprint down the hallway that connects the main perimeter of the second floor to the back hallway where the group's hideout is located. It was originally supposed to be a one-off thing similar to the trip itself, but as we find ourselves returning year after year, the hero hallway run has become a staple of our visits. Trip after trip, I've seen my son grow taller and taller through the footage. Some parents measure their children's height by marking it on a door frame, and I gauge mine by how much taller he's grown since our last run. It's one of the few sentiments that we, like many others, have contributed to the ether of the place. Our footprints echoed amongst those before us and along with those that have come after. It's something special that I hold close to my heart, and it's one of the things that I look forward to the most every year, however fleeting the moment may be. Through my son, I see myself at his age, and I know how much I would have loved to have done that. And I know how lucky I am that I get to share that with him now. It's just 5 seconds of pure bliss a year that mean more to me than anything else in the world. It's things like this that add to the texture of the place. Memories and experiences of all the people that have carved their names into the bark. From sliding down the JCPenney's escalator to a first date on the Ice Palace rink. From July 4th fireworks on the lawn, to an Iron City shared amongst close friends and loved ones in Romero Court where the clock tower once stood. If you look closely, you can still see it. It will always be there, along with all of the other ghosts of the mall's past, still visible to us on screen, frozen in time thanks to the magic of cinema. There's nothing that can erase that. There's this thing called place attachment. It's a theory that suggests that there's an emotional bond that people form with specific locations. It's a feeling that you have when a place holds a part of your identity because of the memories, relationships, and meaning connected to it. The bond can form many different ways. Childhood memories, shared stories or experiences, or from immersing yourself in that place, be it physically or, in some cases, even mentally. A space becomes a place when people give it edges, meaning, value, and worth. Places are not necessarily fixed. They're continually built and rebuilt by the communities that move through them. Their creation is fluid, shaped by perception, memory, identity, relationships, cultures, and history. How a place might resonate with someone can strengthen and shift with time. I had already fallen in love with the Monroeville Mall before I'd even stepped foot inside of it. It had been a part of my identity for years, one of the many amazing things that's afforded to us through the magic of cinema and our own imaginations. But the beautiful thing is how much stronger it's become after returning to it every year. I've made some of the best friends of my life within its walls and created some of the most amazing memories. Long-lasting connections that I never thought possible. When I was younger, I would dream of one day standing inside of it and running through its hallways and corridors. Looking back now, I realize that all of my friends and my family were in the same dream. I just didn't know it then. There is an undeniable spirit that lives within the Monroeville Mall. It's been there since before the foundation was even poured. It was nourished by the lives, families, and community that it touched through the years. Built upon by a courageously independent filmmaker who created a new world for other people through it. It lives within the walls, the pillars, the hallways, and within the people that believe in it. It's what pulls us there, year after year, after year, after year. The spirit of a place can be something ancient, deeply rooted in the evolutionary history of a location that predates man's touch, or forged through time by centuries of strife, struggle, and suffering. But it can also be something created through love, fostered and perpetuated by the very people that it touches. It can outlast commercial progress and urban redevelopment, and it will linger long after the last shopper has exited, the last cup of Gloria Jeans has been poured, the last Iron City has been shared, and the last sprint down a familiar hallway. The spirit of the Monroeville Mall will live forever through all of us.